Let's now continue our focus on the likely major issues that will dominate in Africa this year. Today we put the spotlight on prospects and progress and development in Africa in 2018 and beyond. For more insights, we're joined by Gamal Abdel Gawad, a professor of political sciences. He's joining us from Cairo. He's at the American University in Cairo. Li, a commentator on African affairs, is joining us from Beijing. And here in Nairobi, Vincent Kimosop, he's a strategy, policy and governance expert. He's joining us here in Nairobi. Welcome to Africa Live. Well, let's start off with Gamal Abdel in Cairo. Do tell us about Egypt in 2018, though. What positive developments are you seeing coming out of Egypt in 2018?
I think the good news coming from Egypt will be essentially in the economic front. Egypt has introduced major economic reforms in the past couple of years, and I think the year 2018 will be the time for Egypt to collect the dividends of those reforms. There is signs of increasing growth rate. There is signs of increasing levels of foreign direct investment in the country. Good news also coming in the energy front. The major gas fields entered into production late last year in December, and perhaps they will come to maturation to full-fledged producing oil fields by this year 2018. So there will be some very good news coming on the economic front in Egypt. Of course, there is the due presidential election in the country, and everybody is observing how this will be a step forward toward providing for stability and good governance in Egypt too.
Right. Lily, in Beijing, though, China-Africa relations have grown exponentially over the last decade. How does Africa stand to benefit from the continuing cooperation with China, especially in 2018?
It's definitely. We know that Beijing just announced that this year's the FOCAC meetings will be from the ministerial meetings updated to the leader meetings. It means that all the Africans, all the most Africans leader all the governors, head of the governors will gather in Beijing with the Chinese President Xi Jinping to discuss the future cooperation from Beijing and the Africa continent. And we noticed that since the 2015 Johannesburg summit, and both China and Africa, we have set up the co-funding is a huge money, and we know that all the infrastructure will improve a lot from China. Investment to Africa was very huge money, so I think it's very good fund for the future cooperation, especially these significant years.
Right, Vincent, Kenya had a prolonged electioneering period last year. It did have a massive dent on the economy. What do you see in store for Africa for Kenya particularly in 2018?
I think the final finalization of the political question that the country is facing. The legal issues have been settled, but legitimacy issues are still on the force. So the thawing of the push by the opposition, where that will get them to, vis-a-vis how the government will respond to that. That will be the major political question. But you would expect more concentration by the government on getting the economy back, because really that electioneering period had a dent on our economic progress. You could even see the World Bank downgraded the economic growth of the country, and that is felt directly by the people. So those are the two things that will likely to shape the push for an economic answer to the problems, vis-a-vis the political question that is yet to be resolved.
Right. Gamal Abdel Gawad, we return to you in Cairo, though. Should we expect the North African region to stabilize if planned elections in Libya are successful?
It should, actually. This became like an overdue task, and I think this is the time to do it. And the main reason, I think, is that the defeat of the terrorist group ISIS in Syria and Iraq have forced those groups out to relocate in North Africa, and there is very credible signs that there is a kind of flowing of those terrorist groups into Libya and sometimes also into northern Sinai. It's the only way to defeat and to undermine those terrorist activities in Libya is to establish for national reconciliation, so that we would have a credible government that can defend against this flow of terrorism. I think the main countries who have stakes in the Libyan situation, Egypt in particular, Tunisia, Algeria, and some other regional and international actors, all coming to terms with this fact, and perhaps they will be able to work out a solution to the political crisis in the northern African nation of Libya.
Right, Lily, in Beijing, though, the partnership between China and Africa is on a win-win basis. So in what ways is China gaining from its close ties with African countries?
Yes, I think that I'm quite agree with your point that China and Africa both benefit a lot from this quite positive relationship. And we know that China, we have a capital, we have a technology, and we have many monies, the monies to go to flow to the overseas market. And I think the Africa continent was a quite good ending market for this Chinese capital. And for the Africa side, the Africa, most of country, the major issues, the lack of the capital, the lack of the money, and the technologies, also the human resources. I'm not mean that the individual's labor, because we know that Africa in total you have over 1 billion human resources, and most of the youngsters, I mean those skillful laborers, and China will training most of the youngsters in Africa, and Chinese money and Chinese technologies and Chinese companies, Chinese manufacturing, and all those Chinese made in China maybe shift their capability to the Africa. And we also saw those manufacturers just shift their capability from China to Africa. They made in Africa, but from Chinese capital, and made in Africa, and the ending markets maybe the Europe or maybe the States. So that is a quite good business model for both of China and Africa.
Right. Vincent, we do come back to Kenya now, because there is still quite a lot of political activity with that proposed swearing in of opposition leader Raila Odinga. They're probably slated for some time in the beginning of the year, and there have been calls among key players for dialogue in the country. What should be done, though, to heal the rifts in the country?
The main problem is that when we adopted the Constitution of 2010, there was a build-up towards an excluding the opposition or the alternative government from the political discourse, and because we adopted a pure presidential system. So one of the ways that I see is that the need for us to relook at the Constitution, so that the alternative voice, which is the opposition, is also given the access to political processes, because a pure presidential system has led to a situation whereby an opposition with nearly 50% vote is not able to prosecute its policy agenda within the framework that we have. So that's one thing that I see as having a discussion on. And then also the need to broaden the executive. As you know very well that our politics is canvassed using identity, of course, ethnic. So the system we have also has really made it possible for the communities that have the numbers to dominate politics. So those two things for me are the things that the dialogue will be a basis on, so that as they move towards 2022, we have a system that facilitates our politics, rather than having a system that entrenches combative and really aggressive nature of politics, as we witnessed in 2017.
And so there's still a lot to be witnessed here in Kenya. But for the moment, we return to Cairo, where Gamal Abdel Gawad, Egypt and Sudan have begun the year on a sour diplomatic note, with Sudan now recalling its ambassador to Cairo What should Egypt and Sudan do to resolve this row?
Well, the relations between Egypt and Sudan, particularly in this tense moment, is essentially a byproduct of and a function of two other major conflicts. One about the distribution of the Nile's water. Here the conflict is essentially between Egypt and Ethiopia, and Sudan here is taking somewhat the side of Ethiopia, and this causes a tension in Egyptian-Sudanese relation. On the other hand, also the Sudanese-Egyptian tension is a function of the Middle Eastern politics, extension of Middle Eastern politics, the conflict between the so-called pro-Islamist and the nationalist in the region. Sudan, like an Islamic government allying with the Islamic governments in the region, particularly in Turkey, and somewhat challenging Egypt in a sense, and this causes tension in the relation between the two countries. I think we have to monitor those two conflicts, Middle East conflicts in the one hand, and the conflict related to the Nile Valley on the other hand. What happened in both the Middle East and in the Nile Valley will tell us what is likely to happen in Egyptian-Sudanese relation. By and large, the two nations have been always able to contain conflicts. Conflicts frequently happen between them, but there is a long tradition of capacity to keep those conflicts down and restore normal relation, but ready for the coming, just getting ready for the coming crisis. This has been the history of Egyptian-Sudanese relations for decades, unfortunately.
Right, and Lily, though, we are looking forward now to the upcoming FOCAC summit in coming up shortly this year. How can ties between China and Africa be enhanced to yield more mutual prosperity?
Yes, we know that this summit was held in China in this September, and there is also both China and Africa discussion very closely to check what's the problems between the procedures we have the win-win cooperations. I think one of the most outside worlds cares about the green development. And we know that China, yes, we have some pollutions, we have some problems during the manufacturing procedure. There were some people may ask, is there China will shift those pollution to Africa continent? I think the answer is definitely no, because that last year we have a meeting to check the latest development for the China and Africa cooperations in Beijing, and there was one of the important outcome was the green development. It means that all the China manufacturers to Africa should be green, and we are very confident that this year's summit will have a package of new outcome for the future cooperation. And we also know that there was some third party, including the states, Britain, Germany, they asked to join the China and Africa cooperation. So I think this coming summit will have a very prosperity outcome, and also push the confidence for the global Africa cooperation.
Right, Vincent, a final comment from you, though, and taking this a little bit broader and looking at the wider East African region, though, what should we expect there?
You will see the impact of the leadership of the President of Tanzania in really the management of the thawing relationships in the East African community. As you see, there is closing democratic space in Tanzania. You would also see the major political and democratic developments in Ethiopia. You saw recently the amnesty that was issued by the Prime Minister, showing you that Ethiopia is possibly opening up to pluralism. And then finally, within the EAC region is the management of the conflict in South Sudan. There is really much progress that has been made, and hopefully in 2018 that they will take the opportunity to finally settle down and really build a country that is going to give its people a hope, a future, and a destiny they desired when the referendum took place in the 2000. Remember 2004 when they got independence. So those are the likely major developments. And then broadly outside EAC that will also affect the region is the developments in the democratic, in DRC, particularly will elections be held, will Kabila be there, and if there will be a conflict, then you would expect then the crisis moving from the Great Lakes region, even with refugees immigrating to the EAC region. So those are the things to look for within and outside the EAC in 2018.
Right, quite a busy time for Africa in 2018. Vincent Kimosop joining us here in Nairobi. Thank you for your insights. Lily in Beijing and Gamal Abdel Gawad in Cairo. To you all, thank you for joining us on Africa Live.